Hi there and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Ryan Nobles, and we begin with escalating fallout from the tragic shooting of 2 National Guard members here in Washington. As we learn more about the victims and the alleged gunman, the incident has prompted calls from the president and a sweeping and unprecedented new crackdown on immigrants, including those who have legal status living in the United States. It comes after yesterday we learned from the president that one of the National Guard members, 20-year-old Sarah Beckstrom, died of her injuries as he held a Thanksgiving call with service members.
I must unfortunately tell you that just seconds before I went on, right now I heard that Sarah Beckstrom of West Virginia, one of the guardsmen that we're talking about, highly respected, young, magnificent person, started service in June of 2023, outstanding in every way. She's just passed away. She's no longer with us. She's looking down at us right now. Her parents are with her. It's just happened.
This was the scene last night outside the hospital as members of law enforcement lined the streets, saluting and paying their respects to Beckstrom as part of the dignified transfer procession. The other National Guardsman in the shooting, 24-year-old Andrew Wolf, remains in the hospital and is in critical condition. This morning, U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Jeanine Pirro, announced her office will upgrade the initial charge in the case to first-degree murder, though we should note charges have yet to be filed against the suspect. It comes as we continue to learn more about the alleged gunman, who's been identified as Ramual Lakhanwal, an Afghan national who worked with the CIA in Afghanistan and was evacuated to the U.S. during the chaotic U.S. withdrawal in 2021 during the Biden administration. He was then granted asylum earlier this year under the Trump administration. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, the president ordering an additional 500 troops to Washington, along with a review of all green card holders from 19 countries. He also directed his administration to re-examine the status of the Afghan nationals who were resettled in the U.S., falsely claiming they weren't vetted.
This is how they come in. This is how they're standing on top of each other, and that's an airplane. There was no vetting or anything. They came in unvetted. And we have a lot of others in this country. We're going to get them out. But they go cuckoo. Something happens to them.
Now, the president also lashing out at a reporter's question as she pressed him about his rationale, which we'll get to in a moment. President Trump then going several steps further in a lengthy social media post last night, calling for what he calls reverse migration, saying, "I will permanently pause migration from all third world countries to allow the U.S. system to fully recover." He also says he will, quote, remove anyone who is not a net asset to the United States or is incapable of loving our country, or anyone he deems as, quote, non-compatible with Western civilization. Joining me now, NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs correspondent Kelly O'Donnell, who is with the president in West Palm Beach, and Danny Savalos, a criminal defense attorney and an NBC News legal analyst. So, Kelly, first, let's start with the status of this investigation. What more are we learning about the investigation and the victims?
Well, there were search warrants that were executed at the home and places associated with the suspect. And so we know that those materials, which include things like electronics and laptops and anything that the investigators think could yield some insight, possibly into the planning or the thought process behind this, that's been sent to Quantico under the FBI's care for further scrutiny, and that could be part of where ultimately investigators may find some source of charges or other avenues for their investigation. As you indicated, a very tragic news that Sarah Beckstrom has lost her life, and Andrew Wolf is continuing to try to recover after this very grave injury, and obviously that status could ultimately affect the nature of charges as well. And the president indicated when asked if he might attend the young woman's funeral service, he said he would consider that, but had not yet gotten to that point. So clearly a lot of prayers and concerns still surrounding these families with such a serious and difficult period of mourning for the Beckstrom family, and still concern for the Wolf family and all of their associates and others who are on duty in Washington as well. Ryan?
Yeah, let's turn to the administration's response, Kelly, to the shooting. The president announcing major changes to U.S. immigration policy. Walk through all of this, and do we know if any of these policies have actually gone into effect yet?
It is all in the stage of rhetoric, and there are a couple of areas where there are departments that have said they are acting on some of his specific directives. First, he has said that he wants all Afghans who came in through the program under the Biden period, who had been part of serving alongside American forces and intelligence officers who had been cleared through that process, for their cases to be reviewed. Then more broadly, the president is calling for green card holders from a list of countries of concern, which are defined by the administration, and their countries around the world, including Afghanistan. And there are areas where there might be threats to the U.S. and difficult relationships there between those nations and the U.S., which could perhaps heighten a threat level, to have those cases reviewed. We've seen that Customs and Immigration is saying that they are going to begin acting on some of these directives. Department of Homeland Security also indicated it would begin to do the review of those who came in through that humanitarian parole, which is an immigration term, and asylum pathway that the suspect also had followed, and he was in the country legally under that. And the administration says that it is of great concern to them that they don't understand how he could have been allowed in without vetting. Vetting did occur, but we don't know what happened since 2021 to the present day. Ryan?
And then the president also adding, Kelly, that he's going to cancel any executive order signed by President Biden via auto pen. We know he's been obsessed with President Biden's use of the auto pen. Didn't the president, though, already rescind many of the Biden-era executive orders? I mean, is there any teeth to this?
He did. This strikes me as being a topic the president likes to talk about. He believes it is an effective political weapon, and clearly there has been a lot of this litigated already. The president now in office is able to unwind certain executive orders. He's able to set new ones and has done so regularly. There have been many instances of this, and there is case law that supports the fact that an auto pen is a legal use of the president's authority. President Biden, in the time when we were covering him and his office since he left the White House, has indicated that he was making those decisions himself and was aware of it. And in many cases, he was speaking of those decisions in real time as these events were happening. Ryan?
Okay. Kelly O'Donnell, live in West Palm Beach. Kelly, thanks for that. Let's turn to the legal side of all of this with Danny Savalos. Danny, let's start with the investigation into this tragic shooting. The U.S. Attorney for D.C., Jeanine Pirro, said that more charges could be coming. What would that include?
In all likelihood, I mean, if there's going to be likely a murder charge, and you're going to have several different bases for jurisdiction. Good example would just be straight up murder with a firearm, which is actually a federal statute under the firearms statute. And then, of course, you have any number of different options for the interference with or attack on federal troops like this, federalized troops, I should say, National Guard members. So you're likely to see a whole host of those, to say nothing of just the firearms offenses that could be charged, especially depending on the person's status, the firearm, whether it was a lawful firearm, whether serial numbers obliterate. We don't know any of those things yet. But there will be a vast array of charges that the feds can bring against this suspect.
Now, the president also said that his administration will deport anyone who he describes as who is, quote, non-compatible with Western civilization. Is that an argument that could hold up in a court of law?
That's more of a political argument than it is an actual legal argument, because you need something else in order to remove someone or institute removal proceedings. And those are all spelled out in detail in federal statutes. So, for example, it may be someone that the Trump administration considers to be not compatible with Western civilization, but they're going to need something like a false statement on their application, or an arrest, or a conviction of a crime that qualifies for removal proceedings. So it's not a matter of just the chief executive being able to say, I'm getting rid of anybody who I don't think is compatible with Western civilization. That is simply not a legal statement. On the other hand, what was key to me was the word that he would direct people to review review existing cases. In other words, go over files with a fine-tooth comb, and then you might be able to find some false statements that were made on some of these applications. That would give you the grounds likely to institute removal proceedings.
And then just last week, a federal judge ordered the administration to end the deployment of National Guard troops in D.C. But in the aftermath of this shooting, the Trump administration's filed an emergency appeal, and they said they're actually going to add troops to start patrolling the streets of Washington, D.C. Could the tragic shooting impact the facts and legality surrounding the questions about whether or not it's even legal for these troops to be in Washington?
Sure. I mean, to the extent it goes to the declaration of a national emergency, to the extent it goes to some grounds under which Trump nationalized the National Guard, federalized the National Guard, because there are very specific instances in which the president can federalize the National Guard, which are ordinarily at default under the control of that state's governor. However, in D.C., it's a slightly different rule because that's not a state. That is the District of Columbia. That's federal property. But generally speaking, if we're talking about West Virginia, the president needs specific grounds under the statute. The challenge has been whether the rather nebulous nature or definition of what those grounds are. In other words, whether to invoke them is one thing, but is the president sort of exaggerating the grounds under which he's invoking the federalization of those National Guard troops? So that is something that this recent shooting could move the needle a little bit, but you're still using the same statutory analysis before or after this tragic shooting.
Okay, Danny Savalas, thank you for your expertise as always, my friend. And moments ago, I spoke with Shawn VanDiver, who is the founder and president of AfghanEvac. That's an organization that helps resettle Afghan refugees. He was fiercely critical of the administration, going so far as to accuse it of a cover-up. I began by asking him for his reaction when he learned that the alleged gunman was an Afghan national who was resettled in the U.S.
Well, thank you for having me here today, Ryan. Look, my first thought was I was devastated for the guardsmen who were injured at that time, and now one is dead. For their families, I wish the ones still clinging to life a speedy recovery. And I knew that President Trump and Kash Patel and Vice President Vance were going to try to use this as a cudgel to try to harm immigrants. And surely that's what they've done.
Talk to me, if you can, about the asylum process. He was resettled here, then he was granted asylum. From your experience dealing with some Afghan nationals who are in a similar situation, what type of vetting would they go through?
Oh, goodness. So we're talking a lot about vetting here. I don't think that there was a vetting issue. What I've heard from government sources is that he is cleared green through every step in the vetting process. And let me tell you, this guy has gone through a lot. He would have been vetted before he got onto a plane in Kabul to go to a third country. He would have been vetted again, both medical, security, immigration, all of that. He then came to a U.S. military base here in the United States and would have been vetted again there before he was released out on parole. And then he would have been vetted continuously while he was here. It is important to note that in about a year after arriving here, in August of 2022, he applied for special immigrant visa status. Nothing happened in his case. He got re-parole, which he would have been vetted again for that. He would have been vetted while undergoing the SIV application process. In December of 2024, he applied for asylum. Those are separate things, separate tracks. Come April 2025, the Trump administration approved both his his SIV chief of mission approval and his asylum claim. And he would have been vetted again for both of those. And what we've heard from the National Counterterrorism Center is that he passed all vetting with flying colors.
So I guess what maybe some people are confused by is what that vetting means, because we're hearing administration officials claim that he wasn't vetted or that some of these Afghan refugees aren't vetted in a way that they describe as being able to integrate into U.S. communities. What does that mean? And is that part of the vetting process?
Well, as ever, they're lying to us, right? The administration knows that refugees and these Afghan allies that have come here have undergone the most vetting you can undergo. This guy worked for the CIA for years and years and years. Do we think the CIA didn't vet him? No. They signed off on all of this. They signed off on him coming here. They signed off on him getting asylum. They must have signed off on him getting SIV. Look, the truth is I think that because President Trump and Elon Musk doged all of our national security apparatus, they took a bunch of resources away from the things that are meant to identify lone wolves from community, local, and state grants for law enforcement. Blue states are seeing 69 to 79% reductions in funding because of petty political grievances. And look, I think they may be trying to cover something up. The truth is that this guy passed all of the vetting. He should have been caught by one of those domestic security programs. And we don't know why he wasn't caught by them. But what I do know is that a lot of federal law enforcement resources have been diverted away from important national security missions to picking up people at Home Depot, to political stunts at Home Depot, to political stunts at immigration courts, and to snatching grandmas off the streets and snatching teachers out of classes.
So there's the separate issue of this specific individual, but then there are the thousands of other Afghan refugees who helped the United States military during a long and tumultuous war. You've worked with many of them to get them settled back here in the United States. What's their level of concern that they could be deported?
Oh, my goodness. They're so scared right now. They're scared to go outside. Since day one, the Trump administration has been targeting these folks. They turned off relocations. They turned off refugees. They turned off family reunification. They refused to even meet with any of the active duty service members, 200 active duty service members who have 3,000 individual family members, moms and dads stuck in Afghanistan at the hands of the Taliban. And they're trapped. The administration has grossly targeted our wartime allies, and they're using this as an excuse to finish the job on these folks. And it's really inexcusable. And we cannot let all Afghans and all immigrants from the travel ban countries or other countries face the ire of the administration because of one deranged man's actions. This man has got to be held accountable to the full extent of the law, but you can't have community punishment for all immigrants because one jerk went and did a crazy thing. He clearly has mental health issues, which is a crisis in our country, and we've got to address that issue rather than punish all immigrants and give Stephen Miller exactly what he wants for the holidays.
Okay. Shawn VanDiver, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Coming up, we'll dive deeper into the political fallout as President Trump calls for a sweeping crackdown on immigrants in America in the aftermath of D.C.'s deadly National Guard shooting. Plus, coming together to combat America's opioid crisis, a pair of bipartisan lawmakers speak to Meet the Press about their push to address the epidemic's impact on veterans and what it takes to find common ground in the age of polarized politics. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, the president is vowing a major crackdown on immigrants following the shooting of two members of the National Guard by an Afghan national. The president claims Afghans were not properly vetted by the prior administration. Yesterday, the president was pressed by a reporter about the Department of Justice Inspector General report that found the FBI, quote, effectively communicated and addressed potential national security risks of Afghan evacuees resettled in the United States. This was some of his response.
Your DOJ IG just reported this year that there was thorough vetting by DHS and by the FBI of these Afghans who were brought into the U.S. So why do you blame the Biden administration for what this man did?
Are you stupid? Are you a stupid person? Because they came on a plane along with thousands of other people that shouldn't be here, and you're just asking questions because you're a stupid person.
Joining me now is our panel, Herbie Ziskin, who's a former White House Principal Deputy Communications Director under President Biden, and former North Carolina Governor Pat McCrory. Governor, let me start with you. I want to get your reaction to that exchange with the president. He said the administration is saying this shooting is a result of a failure of policy, but the president doesn't want to actually talk about the policy. Where's the disconnect there?
Well, we've never really had transparency with the policy. In fact, about 12 years ago, I went with a group of bipartisan governors to talk to the FBI about this under the Obama administration when we were having a lot of immigrants come legally to America from the Middle East, and there was worries about lack of evaluation of who these people are and how do we find out who they are. So some things never change, but it's a fair question to ask. Exactly, did this person go through an evaluation? What was the process? And we do need more transparency on that process. Whether that has anything to do with the shooting, I have no idea. But it has been an issue now for over a decade under 3 presidents.
Yeah, it's obviously a very complicated issue. I want to play a little bit more about what the president said last night about the National Guard in Washington. Take a listen to this.
We had very little crime in Washington now for, many months. Record-setting low crime, and this happened. And I don't know how you put this on the scale of that. This is sort of different. This is a terrorism threat, and this was done because they're so effective. If they weren't effective, you probably wouldn't have had this done. But this was done because the National Guard has been so effective. This happened, I assume, because it was so effective. And maybe this man was upset because he couldn't practice crime. Who knows what his motivation was? But what he did was horrible.
Herbie, what do you make of the president's response here? He seems to want to try and distance himself from the attack, but at the same time tout his policies. This just comes a couple of days after he claimed during the Turkey pardoning that there hadn't been a murder falsely in Washington in 6 months, and now he has this. Where's the president coming from here?
Well, he's coming from a place of the same playbook where when there's a tragedy, when there's a moment of mourning, we just lost a guardsman. We have another guardsman who's injured. It's heartbreaking, and we're thinking of their families. The president doesn't use these moments to bring people together. He uses them to divide. He's out attacking Somalian communities in Minnesota. He's lashing out at governors. He's talking about banning all immigrants. He's talking about taking away the citizenship of people who have already become American citizens. And he's saying things that simply just don't make sense. And sadly, this is his playbook. And what we need in a moment like this is a leader who's going to bring people together, who's going to reach out to Americans across the divide. That's not what we get from Donald Trump in these moments. And
Governor, I wonder, we're talking about two different things here, right? We're talking about the crime issue, but then there's also an immigration issue here. Does it seem as though the president's able to focus on which one is a priority here?
Well, there's a lot of confusion between the two, and I'm in Charlotte right now, where I was mayor for 14 years, where we had a major crackdown on, or people being picked up on the streets for the last 2 weeks. The dilemma for me is, listen, there's been a total failure by both political parties on the issue of legal and illegal immigration. The Democrats, with all due respect, had an open border and had sanctuary cities. The Republicans are given the false impression that they're going to deport 10 to 20 million people back to their original space where they came from. Both were wrong. And where is Congress is beyond me right now, and trying to have a long-term solution to this very serious issue regarding both immigration and the vetting of people coming from war-torn areas of the world. This continues to be just a total breakdown and lack of cooperation also between federal, state, and local law enforcement, which has been very politicized during the last 10 to 15 years. It's very disturbing to me as a former mayor and a former governor, where 20 years ago, when we had a high crime rate in the 95 to 2000 time period, almost 30 years ago, we really worked well together with the federal government, and we didn't have the politics get involved about who we tried to arrest and who we worked with. It was great cooperation to lower the crime rate. Sadly, we've come back due to both political parties failing our cities, our states, and our country.
But the governor makes a good point here, Herbie, and the practicality of all the things that Donald Trump is talking about. He's saying, for instance, going back and looking at the citizenship status of naturalized citizens who've been in this country for a long time. Is he, maybe to a certain extent, selling a bill of goods to his supporters that any of this is actually in reality?
He is. He's overreacting in a way where he's suggesting, I have all these tools in the toolbox that simply aren't feasible. And look, when it comes to crime, when it comes to lowering crime, and when it comes to people who are being vetted when they come to this country, of course, public safety is paramount. Of course, it's the president's job to make sure that our communities are safe. But what he's throwing out, his way of demagoguing and scapegoating, that doesn't make us safer. And when it comes to immigration and crime, he is raiding churches, he's raiding schools, he's raiding factories, he's injecting fear into communities where people don't go forward to say, hey, I want to talk about there's a violent criminal in my community, or people are afraid to testify. He's making he's making our communities less safe, and he throws out wild things that just don't make sense when we see a travesty like we saw this week.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Herbie Ziskin, Governor Pat McCrory, appreciate you guys both being here on a holiday week. Thanks so much for joining us. Up next, Ukraine's push for peace collides with a mushrooming corruption scandal as a top aide to President Zelenskyy resigns hours after his home was raided. A former ambassador to Ukraine will join me in studio. Stay with us on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Turning to Ukraine, where a top aide to President Zelenskyy, who was leading peace talks for Ukraine, has resigned after being implicated in a major corruption scandal that's already forced the country's justice and energy ministers to also step down from their positions. Today, President Zelenskyy confirming his chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, resubmitted his resignation. It comes after officials from Ukraine's anti-corruption agency searched Yermak's home early this morning. The latest development complicating the ongoing peace talks between U.S., Russia, and Ukraine. Just yesterday, in an interview published in The Atlantic, Yermak said that Ukraine will not give up territory in exchange for peace, which is a key sticking point in those peace efforts. Joining me now is Bill Taylor, former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and a distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. So let's get your reaction to these charges. This is a top aide to President Zelenskyy, someone directly involved in the peace talks. What does it mean, first for President Zelenskyy and then for the broader peace negotiations?
Shawn, for President Zelenskyy, it might be a benefit. He might come out stronger after this. Andriy Yermak, very powerful, very influential, very smart, very capable, but he had all this responsibility for both running the office of the president as well as you say, the lead on negotiations. That's an awful lot for one person to do. This gives President Zelenskyy the opportunity to split those off, have someone do the office of the president work, and have someone do the negotiating. And he's got plenty of young, smart, untainted, very capable people to turn to.
But this issue of corruption has been something that's kind of hung over the Zelenskyy administration. There's critics here in the United States that have used that as a reason not to provide aid. It's obviously been something that Moscow and Putin have used as a way to try and get in the way of these concessions. Could it lead to Kyiv making major concessions in these peace negotiations?
Not this corruption thing, no. And I don't think there are major concessions that are coming. It is true that and Ukrainians know that they've got a perception problem and a real problem with corruption, and they're dealing with it. Indeed, it was the two independent watchdog anti-corruption agencies that are investigating Yermak and these other ministers that you talked about. So they're on this. And of course the Russians are going to say, oh, there's a problem there. They're dealing with it. The question is, how does Zelenskyy handle that? Does he encourage these investigations? Does he get rid of bad people? So far, he has. And
has there been anything in these investigations that have pointed to Zelenskyy himself? Has he seemed isolated?
Not at this point. Indeed, he has encouraged these two independent watchdogs to continue their investigation.
And you mentioned that there are people that could pick up these roles, right? Are there deputies in this administration that could fill in quickly and ably?
There are. There are people who could step into the kind of the domestic work of the operations of the president, the office of the president. And then there are people who have been part of these negotiations as well that could pick up those parts of the portfolio.
And then, of course, there's the U.S.'s involvement in this. We know Steve Witkoff is expected to meet with the Russian President Putin in Moscow. What do you expect could come from that meeting? And should we take into account the fact that there are these reports that Mr. Witkoff was advising his Russian counterpart on how to curry favor with President Trump?
I think those revelations that Bloomberg published put a constraint on Mr. Witkoff. I mean, he's been pretty freelancing. I think he will be on a shorter leash, and I think he will have this new 19-point plan. The 28-point plan that had been all discussed and leaked and out there in the public, written by the Russians, drafted by the Russians, given to Witkoff. And Rubio, Secretary Rubio, stepped in last weekend, narrowed it down, got input from the Ukrainians and input from the Europeans for a 19-point plan. That's what Witkoff should be presenting to the Russians next week.
And do you think, at the end of the day, that Ukraine is prepared to make concessions to end the war? Should they make those concessions if the other option is the war continues?
The war will continue as long as Putin continues to fight them. The question is, can Putin be pressured to come to the table on this 19-point plan. And President Trump has leverage on Putin. President Trump can push that Putin toward this kind of agreement. But on the concessions question, Ryan, it's a good one. As Yermak said, and what President Zelenskyy has said, they're not going to give up legal claim to all their. They will acknowledge the fact that the Russians occupy 19% of their territory right now. That's a fact. They're not going to give up legal claim to that, because they think at some point they'll get it back. Like the West Germans got East Germany back, the Ukrainians think they'll get that 19%.
Will that be enough for Putin, though?
Probably not. That's why you need President Trump to put hard pressure on Putin.
Okay, all right. This is seems to be a very key point in this war. Ambassador Taylor, always appreciate your expertise. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ryan.
Happy Thanksgiving. All right, and now we're going to have an update on that devastating fire this week at a housing complex in Hong Kong. Officials say the death toll has risen to 128, with 200 people still missing. An investigation into the cause of the deadly fire is underway. A task force probing possible corruption in the renovation project that was underway when the fire broke out says that 8 people have been arrested. And Hong Kong Secretary for Security says preliminary findings suggest the fire may have started in the netting surrounding one of the impacted towers. Keep it here. We'll have more news ahead. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. At a time where it seems like partisanship rules the day on Capitol Hill, here at Meet the Press, we're highlighting the way Congress is still working in a bipartisan fashion on important issues. Recently, Meet the Press moderator Kristen Welker spoke to a pair of congressmen, Greg Murphy, a Republican from North Carolina, and Congressman Joe Courtney, a Democrat from Connecticut, as they team up in an effort to combat the opioid epidemic and its impact on veterans. Take a listen.
Well, I want to start with the legislation that you're co-sponsoring. It will address the opioid epidemic, specifically among veterans. Congressman Courtney, let me start with you. What does the HOPE Act aim to accomplish?
So what it does is actually gets the VA very focused in terms of really trying to, on a recurring basis, collect data so that the system and the country actually has a better understanding of the prevalence of opioid addiction in the veteran community. We know from sort of ad hoc reporting that it's significant. There's incidents of service-connected injuries as well as PTSD, which sort of drives people who are in the veterans community towards the use of opioids and to self-medicate. And so, it's a problem that really we need to get our arms around so that we can come up with really better solutions to try and, reduce that harmful impact.
Well, Congressman Murphy, you are a doctor. Explain why the opioid epidemic is so devastating to the veteran community and what needs to happen in addition to this legislation.
Yeah, Kristen, this has been something that obviously affects veterans more than it does in the civilian population. The overdose rate really is twice as many. And, and we did a lot of great work a decade or so ago. I did a lot in the State House in trying to decrease the number of prescribing opioids by physicians. And there's been remarkable amounts that have been done with this, that we decreased the number of prescribed opioids. But what we have happening is because veterans oftentimes, because of chronic pain from traumatic injuries, et cetera, need to have some type of relief. And sadly enough, a lot of the unprescribed opioids, the ones on the market, the unsolicited, the fentanyls, all the other things, are leading to overdose deaths also. So looking to see why the VA is not addressing these, are they addressing these, really drilling down on why this component still is leading to the tragic number of overdose deaths in our veteran population. Bipartisan effort, but really wanting to make sure that our veterans are taken care of, and we can try to get to the root cause of really why this is happening.
Well, Congressman Courtney, I wonder what kinds of conversations you've had with your fellow lawmakers. Do you get the sense that there's enough support to get this out of the House?
I'm actually pretty optimistic. I mean, the space that we're talking about in terms of people who wear the uniform of this country and our veterans is a place where, by and large, is the most the best opportunity, really, to sort of turn down the partisanship and move a bill forward. Again, Greg and I both represent districts with large military installations. His is huge. Mine has about 8,000 sailors up in Groton, Connecticut. And so, that's where, having that experience, it kind of transcends party identification and your caucuses. And there's a lot more of that, I think, in both bodies, the House and the Senate, that I think gives me hope that we can move this bill.
Well, Congressman Murphy, how optimistic are you? Do you think it can get done this year and get to the president's desk?
I don't know about this year, Kristen. We got a lot to worry about or to work on this year. But as Joe pointed out, we have a lot of veterans actually now that serve in Congress, probably more than we ever had before. And so a lot of these individuals, male, female, and depending on what branch they have great sympathy for their fellow veterans and the troubles that they go through, whether they range from PTSD, opioid addiction, or other disorders. There's a lot of wealth of sympathy, not only for civilians, veterans, and other folks that are in Congress. Understand that this is an issue. It touches, the opioid epidemic outside of veterans touches every demographic that we have. And now specifically with our veterans, those who have served so much and sacrificed so much to serve our nation, I think this is a huge bipartisan effort. And I'm very optimistic, as is Joe, that we get this done probably early next year, I hope.
Okay. Let me ask you about a big headline that we've been tracking. This federal bankruptcy court approving a settlement over the opioid epidemic with Purdue Pharma, I should say, which is the maker of oxycodone. Its owners, the Sackler family. As a part of the settlement, just for our viewers to fill them in, the Sacklers have to contribute up to $7 billion over 15 years and also relinquish ownership of Purdue. Congressman Courtney, Purdue Pharma is based in your home state of Connecticut. Are you satisfied with the terms of this agreement?
So this has been a really long journey for the families and the plaintiffs and the class action. I think, as you know, prior settlement, milestones seem to be the end of the case. And the good news is that actually the judges and the courts rejected what was on the table. Attorney generals, I think, weighed in representing their various states and communities. So this latest iteration is definitely a better product in terms of really reaching more people. Obviously there's going to be, I think, a pretty deep hearing at the bankruptcy court, and the parties are going to have an opportunity to weigh in. People can opt out if they still feel that they want to have their day in court. But at some point, I think everybody's looking for sort of an end game here so that, we can get the help out to people and to communities who really took a lot of the brunt in terms of caring for people, so they get actually compensated.
Congressman Murphy, quickly, what was your reaction to this settlement?
Kristen, this started in the late 80s when people were saying physicians were not treating pain well enough. And Purdue Pharma came out with this new medicine, OxyContin, that was going to cure all, save all, not be addictive. And they lied to physicians and they lied to the American public. And it created the biggest epidemic, obviously, that we've had as far as medication goes. Is it enough? I don't know. That remains to be seen. But it's long, long overdue. And this needs to be some form of justice for those who have been harmed so badly over this horrible 30-plus years.
Absolutely. Well, I want to just zoom out and talk to you broadly about bipartisanship here. Both of you are co-sponsoring this legislation. What are each of you doing to foster bipartisanship in other areas? Congressman Murphy, why don't you start?
Yeah, no, over half of my bills, easily, the majority of my bills are bipartisan in nature. And sadly enough, Kristen, this is just a point blank. The media, the social media, I think is really one of the root causes that we have of the severe, horrible partisanship that we see in this country. We also have members who love the camera, chase the camera, love to say crazy things and cause divisiveness. Joe and I are here to do the work of the people, as should every member of Congress. And sadly enough, sometimes the headlines are made for those who want to cause partisanship. I think this nation does not want that any longer, and I'm glad to be able to work across the aisle to make things for the American people that we all need.
Congressman Courtney?
So, Greg's right. I would note there actually is more of the bipartisanship happening than sometimes people are aware of. have constituents who are almost shocked to hear that. I work with a Republican counterpart on the Armed Services Committee, Trent Kelly from Mississippi, who, his politics are different, but we work together on a whole bunch of measures regarding the Navy and the Marine Corps and veterans. We've just been through a pretty rough moment here in terms of the shutdown. My sense, just again, being back here in town, is that a lot of us and a lot of people are just sort of exhausted by it, and they are ready to sort of get this budget done for FY26. And as Greg said, I think a lot of us now are really sort of scrubbing through bills that are have been sort of pending during the last few months or so to really try and see if we can find ones that are going to move quickly, like the HOPE Act, hopefully, which really it's hard to imagine that there's really going to be opposition of any significant amount. So. But frankly, it takes some effort, and people really have to kind of decide, that that's what they should do, and frankly, that's what the American people desperately want.
Well, picking up on this point, and final question to both of you, if you could talk to each of your conferences, what advice would you give them to turn the temperature down? Congressman Courtney, why don't you start this time?
Sure. So, look at we. Being in the minority, but still, I think that, if you look at the portfolio that we all have here, there's so much work to be done in a whole host of issues, which really, it doesn't take a lot of effort to find places where there is consensus. And hopefully the committee chairs and the ranking members, will really look at their backlog of bills and that have been introduced, and we're now like in 6,000 or 7,000 House bills that have been introduced. Yeah. There's a lot of meat on the bone there that we really could move forward on, and I think actually maybe get some good momentum in this place about the fact that Greg and I standing here. I don't bite, he doesn't bite. We can work together as people from different parties.
Yeah. Well, Kristen, I would say that 80, and this, to Joe's point, American public wouldn't realize this, but I think about 80% of us could agree on 85% of things. It's the folks that are on the far extremes that you hear about from the most, that cause the most noise, that get the most attention from the American public. They don't see, from the news media, you don't see the people behind the scenes that are working so hard on the average things. They don't see the bipartisanship. They don't see people working in committee work or outside committee work actually to get things done on a bipartisan basis. I wish, and I would say this to you, I wish the American media would show more of that. And that's a welcome thing if you guys are doing that. I applaud that tremendously.
Well, and having the two of you here, so significant to talk about this bipartisan legislation that you're co-sponsoring. We hope to have more of these conversations. Congressman Joe Courtney and Greg Murphy, thank you both so much for your time and your perspectives.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you.
Great conversation. Still to come. If it's Black Friday, my one-on-one interview with a top senator who's sounding the alarm on online shopping scams, with Americans projected to spend tens of billions of dollars by Monday. Hopefully you haven't spent anything yet. Just wait until you watch this interview. That story's next on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Across the country, shoppers are on the hunt for that perfect price this Black Friday and Cyber Monday. But if a deal seems too good to be true, it just might be. I spoke with Senator Maggie Hassan, who's the top Democrat on a key congressional committee that studies the economy, as she sounds the alarm about online shopping scammers. The senator shared tips on what to watch for, how to report scams, and what Congress is trying to do about it.
Globally, we've seen just this explosion of scams. Right now, globally, it's $1 trillion industry. It's outpacing the illicit drug trade. At the holidays, it's even more acute. So I'm really trying to sound the alarm for people. Black Friday is coming up. Cyber Monday is coming up. People have saved their hard-earned dollars so that they can buy their loved ones holiday gifts. But these scammers are really targeting folks. So there are scam websites. They look like a legitimate vendor or retailer's website, but if you look at their address, maybe the spelling is off or the formatting's a little bit off, but they're trying to pressure you into some sort of deal that sounds too good to be true, and it is. Then there are also phishing emails. We've seen an explosion of phishing emails like 2,000% over recent years, and they're trying to get you, they'll say things like you need to reset your password right now, or there's a urgent delivery that we need to get more information from you about. So it's really important when you see that kind of pressure tactic to close out of that email, close out of that website. If you want to shop a legitimate retailer, go to the website through the web yourself as opposed to respond to a pop-up. And if you think you are being scammed, you can report that to the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, at reportfraud.ftc.gov. You can also report it to your local police. But I want people to really be aware that anybody can be the victim of a scam. I've talked to constituents all over New Hampshire who have lost their life savings. And it's just important to be aware. You want to make sure that you are buying from a legitimate vendor through a legitimate website and protecting yourself and your loved ones.
I mean, the way that these marketing campaigns work now, right? We're subject to them all day long.
Right.
They pop up on our Instagram feeds, on our social media feeds. We get emails, and they look legitimate, right? I mean,
they look really legitimate. There will often be like a little bit of a misspelling or a formatting difference, but don't risk it. The best way to do online shopping is to go into the website yourself rather than respond to an email or a pop-up, right? And or to a text. And it's also really important to be aware that if somebody is pressuring you to act fast, or to use cryptocurrency or to convert your cash into Bitcoin at a Bitcoin machine, that is very likely a scam. And so, again, people really have lost their life savings to this, ruined their credit rating. Sophisticated, smart people, sometimes scammers will pose as law enforcement and try to get you involved, saying, you know, you're helping them crack a case as they keep siphoning money from you.
You said something I thought was interesting, is that sophisticated people are falling for this, right? Because we have this perception that it's our random aunt who's on Facebook for the first time, who clicks an email that she shouldn't. But the scammers are getting so good at this that everyday people are falling victim to this, even people that consider themselves to be internet savvy.
Right. Lots of people who also are good Samaritans, and if they get approached by a scammer who's saying, you know, hey, there's this terrible problem and you could help us solve it, and they pose, for instance, as law enforcement or a private security company, you can see very sophisticated people who want to be helpful drawn into this. The other thing is that with the advent of AI, scammers can use techniques that make you think you're talking to a loved one. So it's really important to just back away, call your local law enforcement, because, of course, they are now working with federal law enforcement and state police and often have increased expertise in this area. Lastly, I mentioned the FTC, reportfraud.ftc.gov. Our Joint Economic Committee that I'm on keeps a survey going of scams. So if people want to report into us what they think are scams, that's very helpful. It's also on my Senate website.
And it's not as if this could be a one-off, right, where you make one ill-advised purchase, maybe you lose $50, $100 on it. They have the potential to get into your files, into your systems, and wipe you dry, right?
They sure do, and that's why we want people to be so careful. Again, you know, protect yourself. Also, you know, talk to your bank about ways to protect yourself. Make sure, again, that you're using unique, strong passwords in your accounts and two-step authentication. And as always, if something sounds too good to be true, it really probably is.
What can you as a senator do to try and get in the way of this?
Well, so the Joint Economic Committee, where I'm the lead Democrat, we've launched an investigation both across the private sector. We've reached out to companies whose platforms are being manipulated by scammers, like dating platforms, for instance. We've reached out to Starlink because Starlink technology is being used by whole compounds of scammers in Asia to find out what they are doing at the private level to combat scammers. But it's also really important that we have a cross-government approach. And as we gather information in this survey, we're asking people to report in the scams that they've been targeted with. We are trying to make sure that we work towards a centralized reporting platform or place so that the federal government, working with state and local authorities, would have consistent, timely information about scams and then shut them down and hold people accountable. So that's the goal, and that's why we're both sounding the alarm but also trying to collect information.
And thanks to Senator Hassan for joining us. We're going to be we'll be back Monday with more Meet the Press Now, but if it is Sunday, it's Meet the Press on your local NBC News station. Kristen's going to have interviews with Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, Senator Mark Kelly, and Governor Tim Walz. All important news-making interviews. You're not going to want to miss it. But we do have more news ahead right now on NBC News Now. Have a great Black Friday.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.